Hello, everybody. We're just waiting for the next few minutes so that more people can register or can log in to attend. We'll start in about two or 3 minutes, if that's okay. Okay, folks, I think we will make a start. I'm sure there will be more people who will join us as we go on. It's now 10:35 almost. You're all very welcome to this Children's Futures campaign event. It marks the 1-year anniversary of the imposition of the first tranche of infection control restrictions in response to COVID-19, and that included obviously the closure of schools. My name is Tom Maher. I'm the chair of the Children's Rights Alliance, and the Alliance is one member of the Children's Futures campaign. The campaign works with government, education partners and others to secure cross-party and cross-sector public commitment to the prioritisation of reopening of schools and indeed of keeping schools open in line with public health advice, and to limit the negative impact of lockdown on a generation of children and young people. The current members of the campaign are the founding members. That's As I Am, Barnados, the Children's Rights Alliance, Inclusion Ireland, and the National Parents Council Primary. There are other members, of course. We have Pavy Point, Children's Books Ireland, the Dyslexia Association of Ireland, Foróige Spunout.ie, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, and indeed UNICEF Ireland. On behalf of the campaign, I want you to thank you for your attendance today. I don't think we should underestimate the significance of your presence here today, your virtual presence here today. At the last count, we had 206 attendees, and this demonstrates obviously the importance of the campaign and indeed the importance of its aims. As it is, however, a virtual webinar, the only people visible on the screen are those on the panel. We are recording the event, and we will share this recording and the slides with everybody after the event. Can I also remind all attendees that if you have a question about anything raised by any of the presentations, you can put it into the Q&A box, and that's an icon at the bottom of your screen. and we will answer those questions at the question and answer session at the end. Many of you will have seen the news that our children are starting to return to school, both preschools, primary schools, and indeed secondary schools. We know this is a fantastic relief for young children and their families. And speaking at a very personal level, I had a young man returning to school last week, and I think it's the first time he ever looked forward to going back to school. So it is, at a personal and a professional level, I want to express deep gratitude to all those who worked hard to get our early year centres and our schools open, and indeed to all those people who continue to make them safe. 1 year on from the initial school closures, it's children and young people who have borne the brunt of the lockdown. We know many children and young people are resilient and obviously will bounce back. However, for many, if we don't act now and continue to focus on our children's futures, we could have a generation of children and young people that will not reach their full potential. This campaign is concerned about the disproportionate effect of early years and school closures have on certain groups. For instance, we've heard members talk about the specific needs of children and young people with special needs, children living in low-income families, and indeed refugee and traveller children. We know that many groups have experienced huge amounts of learning loss. At the same time, we know that life has been made much more difficult for families living on low incomes because of COVID-19 and the consequent job losses. One of our real concerns is that some children and young people will regress, and they may never reach their full potential in schools. They are vulnerable to dropping out without any academic qualifications whatsoever, and the problems that poses for their futures. These outcomes, though, are not inevitable if we make the right decisions to ensure that all children and young people reach their full potential. And there are practical, real solutions ahead and opportunities ahead. This year, the government will start work on the next national framework for children and young people. This must incorporate a recovery strategy for children and young people post-COVID. The government is also due to start working on preparation for the EU Child Guarantee. And this will hopefully will lead to a national child poverty plan. And education must be a central part of that plan. To help us reflect on last year, and more importantly, to help us plan for the future, the campaign has invited two eminent speakers, Dr. Niall Muldoon, the Ombudsman for Children, and Professor Mary Horgan, the President of the Royal College of Physicians. We will ask both Niall and Mary to speak in turn. I will call upon Niall first. Dr. Muldoon is Ireland's second Ombudsman for Children. He's a counselling and clinical psychologist and was recently appointed for a 6-year term by President Higgins just there in February 2021. As Ombudsman, Niall has focused on generating an Ireland where children and young people are actively heard, particularly those who are most vulnerable. During his tenure, the office has sought to give voice to those children who are often not listened to. In that time, the office has consulted with young people availing of Ireland's child and adolescent mental health services, direct provision, those in children's hospitals, young people living in family hubs, and young people affected by Brexit. I'm privileged to welcome the Ombudsman for Children, Dr. Niall Muldoon. Dr. Muldoon.
Thank you very much, Tom. Hopefully I can click on my PowerPoint. Okay, can you see that and hear that okay?
Sorry, Niall, at the moment, I can just see 3 speakers.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a sharing the screen is the problem then, is it? And then we just
seems to be all right.
Okay, yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
Yes, now I can see it now.
Technology was never my forte, I'm afraid.
There we go.
Okay.
You're good to go.
Okay, thank you very much. And I suppose what I want to do today maybe is just take 10 seconds just while we set ourselves up to remind ourselves where we were this time last year when we heard the news. I can remember where I was for 9/11 back in 2001, and I can remember very clearly where I was this time last year. I was on the road to do a presentation down to Mary Immaculate College, and they were launching their students' charter. Left Dublin in a sunny, bright afternoon or morning, and heard on the way down that the minister or the prime minister, the Taoiseach, was going to make a speech in Washington. As his speech came on, the clouds over the car turned dark and started raining. I had to pull in the car that was raining so hard. I think it was sort of an omen. And that was the sort of closure of the schools. That was a Thursday. They closed the schools that afternoon. And as soon as the speech was over, I got a phone call from Mary Immaculate College to say, don't bother coming down. We have to send all our students home. So there's a real sense of immediacy and panic at that time. We'd been building up to it, hearing little things from China, hearing about Wuhan. I remember listening intently to a young man, an Irish man living in Wuhan, where everything had been shut down. 10 million people had been told they couldn't move. And I thought this was, that was for 2 weeks, and we thought this would never happen in Ireland. However, within a fortnight it had. I suppose the key was that we all bought into it. The conversation was about shutting down to flatten the curve. We talked very well about all being in this together, the sense of camaraderie, the sense of social solidarity. And that first lockdown probably really was Ireland at its strongest point. We found a way of doing things that were different. We cherished being with each other. And it was a really positive input for a period of time. We learned about this thing called remote learning, which seemed to become a thing that we never had before, and which always was sounded like it was a really pre-planned. We were even so grateful to stay safe that we decided we were happy to give up St. Paddy's Day, which was a big sacrifice for us Irish, and stay at home. But we did a good job. But obviously we all know that it went on from there. There was a lot of impact from the first lockdown and the second lockdown. We managed to get our schools reopened in September. And I suppose I want to just spend a couple of minutes on a couple of my thoughts from that sort of the rest of the year across the areas. Education and childcare are obviously the biggest ones, and that's what Children's Future is focusing on. The concept, even we have 1 million children in primary and post-primary schools, and we also have another 200,000 in the sort of early years category, childcare. And that's hugely important to remember that. I think one of the things that came out of COVID was the national recognition of importance of childcare, and our first 5 strategy is going to be vital coming out of this process as well, that we invest more and plan better for our early years children across the board. I'll talk a little bit more about the inequalities that came with education later on. I just want to flag just one example of really crucial elements. There's a group that call themselves Forgotten Families, which talk about children living in homes where the parent or a sibling is severely high risk, and they find it too difficult and scary, and decide that they won't go to school. Just a very small number of children, but we haven't been offering them the supports we need to. So again, there's the COVID-19 has highlighted a range of different categories of people that need support at various times. And I think the flexibility is something we need to keep working on. Within health and development, I'm sure Professor Horgan will be talking a lot more about this than I can. But just that concept of the things that are waiting for us around the corner, the waiting lists have grown. Mental health has changed enormously. Even for the people who are fit and healthy, this is a real trying time over the last 12 months. Health mightn't be a problem. Now we're in sort of social isolation. We're separated from our families and our carers and our loved ones, and our releases, the places where we used to go to recharge our batteries are gone. The social activities, the art, the sports, the music, the theatre. So it leads to levels of anxiety and distress that's building up for us. Newborns, infants in schools. So again, one of my colleagues had a newborn just in April last year, and it was 6 months before they got to meet their grandparents and their cousins. And those sort of things are really going to have an impact in the future as well. Creches tell me about stories of children being brought in now, and because the parents have to stay outside the door, there's a real difficulty with this, with settling down, the attachment, making strange, all those things that tend to be naturally dealt with over the course of the first 9 months of a child's life have been different in this last 12 months. And the infants in this, who love the socialization, who learn how to socialize, how to share, how to work in teams, how to work together in groups, all those things are different. And as Tom said, we need to plan now to help them recover so that they can keep reaching their potential. Child protection and welfare has been impacted enormously. Our whole child protection and welfare framework is built around a cohort of professionals. The GP, who doesn't see as many children and families as they might have, the public health nurse, who doesn't necessarily go into the house as often as they did before, the social workers who don't have access, the teachers are the most regular contact with children and can see the change in a child. Maybe they're wearing the same clothes for a week, maybe they've got bruises, maybe they're just reserved and withdrawn. They're not getting to see them, so that's having a huge impact on how we access and support our children. And it's really, we can see there was a huge reduction in welfare, child protection referrals during the lockdown. Poverty and exclusion has come to the fore. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But again, I'm very much aware of that sort of, if you start off with very little and people shut down the society that supports you, that can make it much, much harder for you to do your best. And as Tom says, talking about reaching the potential, the children who are living in poverty now are going to find it harder to reach the potential unless we do something extra for them. Leisure, recreation and culture, that's one of the rights that children have, and they've all been shut down. I think one of the really important changes the government made after the first lockdown was to immediately open up plays, grounds, sports for children under 18, and create those opportunities for those children to engage in that sort of manner. And that really was an important thing that needs to be kept to the fore when we plan for the new future. Just before we go into the next slides, maybe I might just ask you to think of a young boy called Eamon, just calling him Eamon. He's a young boy with Down syndrome, bright guy, but he's in a special class in a mainstream school. Really, enjoyed being back in school last September through to Christmas, and was itching to get back to school over Christmas. And just want you to think about, I'm going to show you a couple of slides, and want you to think about his reaction to each of these slides as he finds out about them. So we look back to the 6th of January, the Department of Education came out and said that from the 11th of January, all schools will be closed, or which was supposed to be the opening time, they're going to be closed until the 1st of February. But they did, for proviso, they did say students who attend special schools, special classes of primary and post-primary and special settings will attend school in person. And similarly, the Leaving Cert students will attend school 3 days per week from the 11th of January. So again, how does Eamon feel there? He was jumping with joy. He would have known his brothers and sisters might not have got back to school, but he was okay to go back next Monday. So that would have been, I think, the 6th of January was a Wednesday. So he was as happy as Larry and his family would have been very happy in that regard as well. The next day, the very next day, the Department of Education said this evening, the Minister for Education confirmed that special schools and classes will now not reopen on Monday, the 11th of January. So again, Eamon, young man with Down syndrome, eager to get back to school and meet his friends and learn, has had the rug pulled from under him. There's, what's the explanation? Not sure why. When will it happen? Don't know. So is it only put back by a day? Is it put back by 2 days? Don't know. So the lack of clarity is something that's going to cause anxiety for young Eamon and his family. So that was the 7th of January. So 7 days later, a full week later, the Department of Education say that schools to reopen for students with special needs from the 21st of January. But this time it'll be a phased return for children in special schools and a return to school for those in special classes in primary school and children with significant additional needs in mainstream classes beginning on 21st of January. While we're also working in parallel with post-primary stakeholders to address their concerns. So Eamon, again, has been told, fantastic, I'm going to get back into school. That's the category, I'm in one of those categories. I'll get back into school on the 21st of January. I'll have to wait another week, but I'll be getting back. The family would be glad to have that knowledge as well, but they're wondering about their Leaving Cert student. What's the story? Why has that changed? What's happening there? And again, limited information coming out and the anxiety that goes with that limited information. Humans thrive on certainty. And we are really feeding an uncertainty and anxiety. 5 days later, the 19th of January, from the Journal, it says, government abandons return of special education after unions reject plan. This is not about individuals or any grouping. It's just trying to feel what it's like from the child's point of view. What does that do to him? When government abandons, the term abandons is strong, but it probably makes sense to Eamon. That's probably how he feels and how his family may feel. Where was the long-term planning? Where was the future planning in this regard? Everything that I spoke of as Ombudsman for Children since this happened, I asked for a plan in relation to returning to schools if there was a COVID spike back in September last year. And I also asked for a plan for the Leaving Cert last year in September as well. None of them were done. Any of the arguments I've heard since January are arguments that were already in place that were valid and reasonable questions to be asked. And they should have been sorted out before Christmas so that Eamon wasn't in the position he found himself in, and still finds himself in, perhaps. He came back only 2 weeks ago, so he's had to go through the whole month of February with that uncertainty. So that's looking back. Currently, where are we 1 year on? Unfortunately, we've lost 4,300 people, mainly the older generation. And I'm not saying that in any derogatory way. What I'm saying that is that connects us to our children. They're our grandparents. They're our children's grandparents. They're our mothers and fathers. They're connected to the children's parents. So there's an impact all the way down the line to our children when people die, regardless. But we also lost the skills of bereavement that we have in Ireland. We had one of the best traditions and formulae for helping people through death, through a wake and a funeral system, which allowed people to come together and grieve. And that's been taken away. And it's been taken away from a lot of people's cultures. It was very strong in travellers and other cultures to have a strong funeral. And that's a real impact on children as well. So they don't get the same grieving process as they would have had before. We know there's been an increase in domestic violence, over 20%. Hugely dangerous situation for everybody. Again, the same with child abuse. There's been a 40% decrease in reports of child abuse. We don't expect that that's gone away. We expect it's just gone underground. The same as the domestic violence has been focused on, and the increase in reports is good. But we know our children are living inside houses and bubbles that are not safe for them. And that's something we need to be concerned about. Many of the children in the education side of things have only had 80 days of education since the 12th of March. So there's some of them still waiting till the middle of April after Easter to get back to school. So at that best of time, they'll have 4 or 5 weeks maybe at that stage. And then the vulnerable groups, which I want to focus on a wee bit, are badly exposed. These are still, as Mike Ryan from the WHO said, there is still a deeply unfair, deeply inequitable world where access to basic human rights like health is given as a privilege. And that's something we need to be careful of in Ireland, that we don't do that. And I think we've done a great job as regards to vaccination planning. We've been a very open, transparent and ethical format for coming up with the list of cohorts. And once we work our way through that, that'll be hugely changed vista for us all. But it has highlighted the cracks in our society and where the disadvantaged really fall through during this COVID lockdown. So again, from this year on, or from the last year, there's been 5 cohorts that I'm very clearly concerned about. One is children with special needs and special educational needs. They've been really disadvantaged through the lack of education and the socialization and the therapies that go with being in school. There's the children in congregated settings, family hubs, emergency accommodation, halting sites, direct provision, Oberstown, and residential centres for children in care. Those are all really difficult places to be when you're in knockdown completely. You don't have access to your family. You may only be watching people on video where you might have had face-to-face visits before. Those sort of things are really difficult. Children in foster care don't have access to their biological parents as well. The next one is mental health. Again, huge one. As I said earlier, even the most healthy, strong-minded person will find this difficult. I'd like to consider myself one of those people, but I still think at the best I'm working maybe 70% because I don't have that same capacity to recharge as I would have had before. It's a whole population impact. I've described before, children are living in sort of a low-level melancholy, that sort of lack of joy in their life, places to go, things to change, things to know, things to explore. They've no place to find the joy like they would have had before, no socialization. It's all online. It's a really difficult thing. There's 2,000 people, 2,000 children waiting for CAMS appointment. There's 10,000 people waiting for primary care, most of them psychology, most of them are children. There's been a decrease in the access to inpatient units in mental health, and there's also been an increase in eating disorders. So it's a clear and present danger for our children in regards to mental health. Poverty, you know, the No Child 2020 poverty was one of the key elements of that, but I think child poverty is a huge thing. And we know that that's going to be a difficulty into the future if we don't work on it now. And finally, the digital divide. Again, this is where the National Parents Council had done their survey a number of weeks ago when they launched the Children's Future campaign, and showed that there was only 37% of our children in primary school have their own device, 46% don't have a quiet space to work in, and 55% of them need an adult with them at all times to do remote learning. So it's not exactly remote learning, it's adult assisted remote learning. So, and the digital divide, I always have to reinforce the fact that that's not just urban, rural. There's many, many, many children within Dublin and within the cities who cannot afford broadband, who cannot afford the IT or the hardware equipment. And I know Children's Rights Alliance has done a lot of work in providing, getting laptops out to people who need it. So they're the issues that I see at this moment in time. So what about 5 years on? And I suppose I'm going a little bit further than maybe perhaps Children's Futures had looked at. But for me, I think this is a real opportunity to change things completely, to turn our world down for the better, and to take something positive out of this COVID crisis. You know, once we get back into education, if we can fulfill the Children's Futures asks around secure education, how we keep them open, get people in as quick as possible, catch up with the education system and the loss. We've now got a prediction from the ESRI that next year we could have 13% child poverty. That's a huge number. But we also recognise that the government are saying this very clearly. They're very strong and bullish in their confidence in the economy bouncing back. They said there's 11 billion euros been saved in the last 12 months, and that has to be spent, they feel, over the next 12 months. So that'll give us a bounce back. Borrowing has never been cheaper. We could be in a position to build something new and create something different. And that's what I'm recommending at this point, a thing called a COVID dividend, you know, for children, as I say, which can change society forever. We can look back on this and say, this was a terrible time. We lost 4,300 people or more, but we did change our society as a result of it. And what I'm recommending is something in the akin to the New Deal in America, where they came out of the Great Recession in the 30s. The birth of the NHS came out of the crisis of the Second World War, 1940s, late 40s. And the Marshall Plan in 1947 showed a huge investment into the European economy and created Germany as the strongest economy in Europe through very prudent and smart and future-thinking investment. Ireland has done this before. If we go back, it's almost 100 years since we showed this real level of political bravery. Ardna Crusha took 4 years to build, 5,000 workers, but it took up almost 1/5 of our entire annual budget. But it changed the future for the next 50 years because it created electricity and created electrification system around the country, which changed the future of Ireland. So from my point of view, what I'm asking the government to do is just take a look at 3 main targets. To create a living wage for those families who we know are living in poverty or close to that level. It took 3 weeks to create the PUP, 3 weeks, and we now have a year's worth of data from that, so we know exactly how to keep people safe. Fantastic innovation, fantastic ability to change and move fast by the public servants. We can now do that. I'm just putting up this amount, but the concept of a living wage means that those children who live in those families have support, have strength, and have parents who don't have to financially strained, who can afford food, clothes, warm, heat, education, and it would allow those children to reap the rewards of same and really strive to reach their potential. We could change their world completely in that regard. If we borrowed enough now, we could end homelessness. The direct provision plan shows that, you know, they're looking to create a situation in which they can facilitate 3,500 to 4,000 people in on-door housing over the next 5 years. The same plan could work with homelessness. We could really eradicate that and again change the world of those children who live in homelessness. We still have over 2,500 children in that situation. That could change their world completely and in turn change our society, because those children go on to thrive and to strive to greatness within their education system and within their society in the future. And through that, I think the extra supports for DESH communities, we have over 800 schools in DESH, nominated as DESH. And I think they've been working as oases in the middle of a desert where the community hasn't been supported. We need to equally support the community. So again, instead of the students having to be role models and for the community helps them to be just students who thrive within the DESH education system. And I would be pushing that with the right supports for work support, reskilling, return to education for families around the DESH communities, and financial support in that way, we could find situations where children in schools would start to celebrate coming out of a DESH nomination. That's what we should be striving to over the next 10 years. I think from my point of view too, all these sort of things will lead to something my colleague, the Children's Commissioner in England, calls children finding the joy in finding out again. So if you take away the threat of COVID and you all take away the threat of financial insecurity and poverty and cold and hunger, you will allow children to find the joy in finding out. So they will strive to use their natural curiosity to be as good as they can be and to be who they should be in the future. I'm calling on the government to really think long and hard about future thinking, plan for the next 5 years, put your head up and say, what do we want to be in 5 years' time? What's going to come out of COVID that we can really stand over and say that was a really positive change as a result of a terrible situation? That's it. I'm just going to leave it at that and look forward to the questions and answers. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Niall. I'm struck that I'm thankful to the campaign, first of all, to give us the opportunity in the middle of this crisis to sit back and reflect. And I think, Niall, you've done that very, very well. I'm also struck by the optimism that you've expressed, and I think that's something that we need to grab hold of and work towards that. So thanks for that, Niall. And just generally, there are questions coming into the Q&A box. Can I suggest that we continue to put your questions into the Q&A box, but we will answer those questions after the next speaker. Can you also, I wouldn't mind if you could say what organization you're from and your name on the question, so that we know we have some context. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Mary Horgan to speak to us here today. Professor Horgan is the President of the Royal College of Physicians of Ireland, a former Dean of the School of Medicine at UCC, and a consultant physician in infectious diseases at Cork University Hospital. She graduated from UCD in 1986. Professor Horgan was appointed as the Dean of the Medical School in UCC in 2013 and held the position for a 4-year term. She's been a ministerial appointment of a number of health service related national boards, including HIPRA, IBTS, and was appointed chair of the National Research Ethics Committee on COVID-19. She is on the GEA's Expert Advisory Committee on COVID-19, and she's worked with World Rugby on return to play strategies. She was appointed to NEFIT in January 2021 and the Advisory Committee on Rapid Testing in February 2021. She was awarded the UCD Alumni Award in 2019. In 2017, Professor Horgan was elected as President of the Royal College of Physicians of Ireland, the first woman to hold this position in the college's entire history, which was founded in 1654. Professor Horgan, you're very welcome, and we are indeed privileged to have you speak to us here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm absolutely delighted to have been asked. I suppose I'm going to give maybe some background, my own personal background and the background of the college, and I'm going to speak through things. I don't have slides. So the Royal College of Physicians of Ireland is the largest and oldest postgraduate training body, and of relevance is the fact that we train all the paediatricians in Ireland. So every time anyone sees a paediatrician, they're members and have been trained by our college. We also train the GPs who are key to providing services out in the community. and indeed support a lot of the other multidisciplinary teaching and training activities in other allied healthcare professionals. We are also big into advocacy, and I'll speak about that a little later because it's really pertinent to the work that the Children's Rights Alliance are doing. My own personal background, as Tom said, I'm an infectious disease specialist. I've been in position in Cork since 1997. I'm a Kerry woman who went to Dublin, ended up in Cork, and built up the service from there. It was the second infectious disease appointment, and I spent 7 years training and practicing in the US before coming back here. And I think what's relevant with infectious diseases that they disproportionately affect those that are marginalized, those that are poor, and are often associated with stigma. And I'll speak a little bit about that because certainly there are challenges that we even see now with this current pandemic. It absolutely disproportionately affects those that are vulnerable, those that are marginalized, and those that live in poverty, not only in this country, but globally. And just to reiterate what Niall said earlier, a global pandemic requires a global response. So this is not just looking after ourselves, this is looking after other countries that are not as fortunate as we are in this country, even though there are issues, and we'll hear a bit more about them, but it does require understanding that to protect ourselves, we have to protect others. I'm also a mother, and I understand the importance of education, of good health in children. Certainly when I was growing up, my father was a teacher, and he instilled the importance and privilege of education, how it gets us out of poverty, how it allows us to speak for those that may not have a voice. And I think that's our job. I also have a son with autism, so I'm fully aware of the importance of integration and inclusion, of diversity, of acceptance, of tolerance, and of advocacy. And I think it's when you see people, I suppose, not having an insight into how important diversity is in our society, it is something that we need to speak up for. So from the College of Physicians' point of view, we've been extremely strong in the area of advocacy. I'm going to take you back maybe about a century ago to the time of Kathleen Lynn, who was an inspirational patriot and a supporter of children's rights and their health from a very early stage. She was very involved in the 1916 Rising and subsequently set up a St. Ultan's Hospital that specifically cared for children of inner city children, those that were marginalized, those that were deprived. And following on that, I have to acknowledge the strength of our Faculty of Pathology, Faculty of Pediatrics, who continue to advocate for children's health. I'll go over a few recent policy documents that they have done. One that was first published in August 2020 and subsequently revised with an updated draft in November 2020 about the return of our children to schools and the huge support they have for that, and also the normalization of services across mental and physical health, as well as the importance of sports and activity to our children. I suppose I had mentioned, Tom mentioned earlier, I was very involved in getting GA back to play, but they took a really important step under a time of uncertainty with my encouragement to get their cool camps opened. That resulted in 71,000 children being active over the summer. It was absolutely the right decision. We are living in an imperfect world. We're living in a world that is not risk-free, and we do need to make decisions based on the evidence that we have, and that includes opening of schools. Interestingly, children are probably the least impacted health-wise purely, if you're looking at purely from COVID, as opposed to a lot of what Niall said, but they're hugely impacted in every other way. So in the paper that the Faculty of Pediatrics and Faculty of Public Health Medicine published in August 2020, they outlined the huge impact the closure of schools had, particularly on people with special needs. It's so important that the structure, the support that we give those with special needs and how they're integrated into our normal system, if you like to call it that way, how important it is. The other health services that we provide through schools are also or have been impacted, and they include sports, the provision of food to a lot of our children, child protection and our ability of our teachers and special needs assistants to see red flags when it comes to children. Vaccination programs, we know how important they are. They are one of the biggest public health interventions that save lives. And so it is absolutely necessary that they continue, including the HPV vaccine and childhood vaccines that are provided through schools. Also, developmental screening programs that are provided by our public health doctors and public health nurses are absolutely essential in picking up areas or flags that need to be seek attention. And also the secondary distresses that children see at home if an income isn't coming in, if they're under pressure from, not being able to pay mortgage, put the food on the table. These all trickled through. And I was struck by, I was giving a talk with my friend and colleague, Professor Karina Butler, you'll know her from NIAC, last October. She has worked in pediatrics for about 40 years now, and it struck her for the first time how anxious children were when they came to visit her. They were fidgeting, they were anxious. And I think that's a reflection also of how the population feel in a time of certainty. There's an infodemic. Every single day we're bombarded by information that we have to tease out. And I think what we really need to do, an alliance like this, a political alliance is also important. We have a common enemy here. We need to be all on the same page to really try to defeat this enemy so that we can get to a better place. And I do believe we are on the road to that with the rollout of the vaccine program. Of course, it's a huge vaccine program and there will be bumps on the road, but my understanding is all the vaccines work, they work in better than even in the clinical trials. And it's really welcome that trials are now ongoing, not in children, both prepubertal and postpubertal adolescents, so that they also will be included in programs to come, so that they can do normal activities like sports, like visiting grandparents, like hanging out together. I am going to mention two other papers that the College of Physicians did. One on the impact of homelessness and inadequate housing on children's health, done jointly by the Faculty of Public Health Medicine and the Faculty of Pediatrics in November 2019. And I suppose the headline of this was that 25% have an increased risk of severe physical and mental ill health and disability in childhood and early adulthood if the child experiences poor housing. And of course, this has trickle down effects into adulthood. The other is the Children in Direct Provision that was published in December 2019, again by the Faculty of Pediatrics, who called for abolition of this. I work closely with many of those in direct provision because often they've got chronic infections. And the issue of accommodation, of resources, including translation, health, such as vaccines and provision of clinics, both in hospitals, but in the community, and also of education, even at third level, should all be afforded. And we certainly welcomed the government's white paper that was published in February 2021, calling for an abolition. And I suppose two last things. There was a paper published on obesity in March 2021, just last week, outlining that childhood obesity is a major issue in the country. 1 in 5 children in primary school and 1 in 4 children aged between 17 and 18 are obese, and it affects females more than males. And it particularly affects those in disadvantaged areas, and deaf schools have double the rates that other schools have. So, I mean, there are solutions. This alliance needs to be listened to. There are 1 in 5 of our children living in poverty in a country like this. That is absolutely not acceptable. Solutions have been provided in the paper published by the faculties of Public Health Medicine. Lorraine Kine is our Dean of Pediatrics, and the Faculty of Public Health Medicine, and Emer Shelley is our Dean there. We will continue as a college to advocate for the needs of children as outlined by Niall in his talk earlier. I think we're in a better path from COVID-19. But we do need political unity, to get us to a better place. There's no perfect way of doing it. Nobody is an expert in COVID-19 because it is a new infection. But there are ways of getting to a better place, just like we did with other chronic infections like HIV and AIDS. And that requires absolute community involvement, community engagement, and community ownership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Horgan, for that very illuminating talk. It strikes me from what you were saying that once a crisis hits a society, any chinks in the equality across the board, be it with young people, old people, people with special needs, that crisis exaggerates those chinks and exaggerates the inequality, and we can see them laid bare. And indeed, COVID-19 has showed us that where there are difficulties, they are exaggerated, and those that are discriminated against. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. And I think both speakers have highlighted that and identified it. Thank you very much both for your talks, very illuminating and interesting talks, very thought-provoking, and we do have a lot of questions coming through. What I intend to do is to read through the questions so that we all hear them, and then allocate them accordingly if they've been directed to one or other of both speakers. If I can ask that if people are asking questions, keep them short. People are less interested in listening to me reading questions and much more interested in the answers. I will say one thing: we will be finished and completed by 12 o'clock. If that means, as chair, I need to cut some questions short, I'll have to do that, and I apologize in advance if that is the case. I'm going to take it from the top. Niall, what about the children with additional needs in mainstream classes in secondary school? They are still being discriminated against. Niall, do you want to make a comment on that? Yeah,
I mean, listen, that's very simple. That shouldn't happen. They should be back. You know, I mean, I rarely come out and support a government press release very quickly, but on the 6th of July or 6th of January, I did come out very quickly and said it supported the return of all children with special needs into all schools was what they had planned, and I was delighted with that. I'd pushed for it. Yeah. So any delay, the fact that it's been delayed all the way to the middle of April is just it's a shame.
Okay. There's a question here about child-to-parent violence and the additional problems associated with that imposed by COVID-19. Do we have, how do we regard that? And I'll direct that question at both Professor Horgan and Dr. Muldoon. It's a significant issue, and it is something that can be, because of the stigma associated with it, can be hidden. COVID-19 is exacerbating any problems that is posed by this problem in the first place.
if I don't have a huge direct connection with it, but I can understand exactly where it's coming from. I spent much of my career working with abuse, and adolescence is a difficult time for people, and they often react by being abusive in some form or other. The pressure that they're under at the moment, and the close down and the shutdown, must make it very difficult for the parents to go and acknowledge what they're going through at the hands of their child. I have seen it a lot in relation to children with challenging behaviours. So the children who are acting out physically just become stronger than their parents. And that can be very difficult too, because it feels like a failure on the part of the parent to come forward. But we need to allow them to come forward. We need to create a space for them. We need to support them through the social workers and through our health system to come forward. And it's not again, Ireland has a very bad relationship with what whistleblowing, for want of a better word, but oftentimes parents feel like that's what they're doing. They're letting the child down if they come forward and say, my child has done something wrong, but they haven't. The child is reacting to a situation, and we need to help the child and you as a parent as well. So I think we need to really open up our arms and allow that to have people to come forward with those as quickly as possible.
I think that's the essence of the comment. Professor Horgan, anything to add?
I mean, it's a particularly, adolescence is a particularly challenging time, and not to be able to do all of the things that adolescents normally do to vent in many respects. There's no sports, there's no hanging around with friends, there's nothing else to do, and they're at home, and the conflict arises as it often does anyway, but then it can escalate into physical because they don't have any other outlet to do it. And that's why I think that sports needs to get back along with schools. It's outdoors, and we know that outdoor activity is so much less at risk. I suppose also highlighting the need for additional specialism in adolescence, be it adolescent mental health, like we see in CAMS, but also adolescents in pediatrics. It's a small proportion of the training we do, but they are, I mean, you really could divide children into pre-pubertal and post-pubertal. They're quite different. So really strengthening those, as we have called for, would be really important.
Thank you for that. Thanks for the informative input, Niall. I would love to see another target around ensuring access to timely healthcare for children and strategies to deal with the backlog. Anna Gunning from Children in Hospital Ireland. That's that all. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
no.
we can't argue with that. I mean, again, I think it should be part of the future planning. We know that all the waiting lists have been backed up. I'm sure Professor Horgan will know better than I would, but there's been backlog everywhere, whether it's operations or assessments, whatever. People have been moved from their jobs into other jobs for the last 6 or 7 months. So there is a backlog. So we certainly should be planning for that, and as soon as possible, to get equality.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. As I said, certainly from a pure COVID point of view, children have not been impacted. The hospitals have been quiet. Pediatric hospitals have been quiet. There's an absolute urgency to get people redeployed. We're at the end of our 3rd wave, and our healthcare workers are now vaccinated. So we need to upscale the normal pediatric activities as soon as possible. And that means real life encounters. And we spoke about that. That is really important.
Okay, thank you. I'll go on to another one. Where is the youth representation on this panel? A lot of time is as adults sit in a room, albeit currently virtually, and talk about young people. They should be central to webinars and panel discussions in a real visible way. I realize you may want to manage time, these webinars, keeping them to a certain time limit, but worth considering the value of giving more time to it and being more inclusive. Presentations are great, and thoughts about where we go from here are welcome, but would be good to hear a bit more thrashing out of it and debate in a more practical way with organisations and stakeholders. And that's Louise from the Child Protection she is the Child Protection and Welfare Officer with Youth Theatre Ireland. I think I would agree with that. And my understanding is that we do have a follow-up event that will include much more participation of youth representative organisations. I think that will happen, and that that more meatier debate that we want to have, and the more debate will happen in time, Louise. And thanks for that comment. Alan from from Feroga, he's the digital comms person. Can Dr. Muldoon and Professor Horgan discuss how they see non-formal education helping to fill the gap where our young people's development, where formal education cannot?
Niall, are you the expert?
No, I don't think I'm an expert. You go ahead, and I'll comment.
Professor Horgan, we'll let you.
I'm assuming by formal education versus informal is outside the classroom in all its, so it's a blended type of approach.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah, I think the issue with education, it's far beyond just the academic part of it. It's the social development, it's the environment, and it's our ability to keep an eye on our children too, and get them integrated into society as much as possible. So the formal education, to me, trumps everything, because and people need structure. That's how our society works. We keep on telling our kids, or before this, even though mine are in their 20s now, not to be on the screen so much, and all of a sudden it's like, well, you can't go out to play, you can't go to play sports, off you go, and we're teaching how to do things on screen. I think it's really highlighting what school and education is about, way beyond the academia.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think that's the whole idea. We need to look at our education system completely different into the future, and it's one of the things I didn't quite put on there, but I think the DESH community sort of touches on that. But we need to see. I mean, I think people will oftentimes be shocked by the fact that 65% of our students who do Leaving Certs average 400 points. So, most people aren't fighting to be doctors, lawyers, solicitors, psychologists, whatever it is. So that's where the general population is. And I think the informal education is sort of places like Cork Life Centre and other informal places where youth workers are involved, volunteers help. They meet children where they're coming from, as opposed to force the children into the system of education. And we need to have more and more flexibility like that, I think, for the future, especially now as we come out of it, because some of our children will rebel. We will lose some of those children. They won't go back. And we need to find an informal manner of keeping them in some sort of education, because they're bright, intelligent, articulate. They just have been let down by the system. So I think our education system has to really adapt from here on in. There's a senior cycle review underway since 2017, which they planned on implementing in 2030. And I'm calling them now to make sure that's done before 2023. We can really change the way we do things so that there's much more vocational, there's much more broader, holistic education going on. And the recommendation I always give is that we cut down our education to 4 days a week. So maybe you do 5 subjects instead of 7. But on the 5th day, you do what you want to do, what you love, which could be mechanics, it could be landscape gardening, it could be hairdressing, it could be singing, it could be writing, and you get credit for that as well. So you start to value the holistic person. It could be going into the community with older people, whatever it might be. But those are just some of the things we need to start looking at. But I think the informal education system has been picking up the children that we would often leave behind, which is really unfair, and we need to ironically, formalizing would probably ruin it, but we need to support them more, because we are losing children who have a lot of capacity and a lot of potential, just because our system doesn't provide flexibility enough for them in the way they learn, in the way they want to learn, and the things they want to learn. I think we can certainly improve on that, and I think it's great credit to the people involved in that form of the system at the moment.
I think the formal education system itself, I think we underestimate the additional things that the formal education system provides for us. It isn't all, as you say, 600 points. There's so much more development that goes on in schools that has nothing got to do with academia. It's personal, social, and development. Niamh Kelly from One Family. My question is for Niall Muldoon. Your COVID-19 dividend proposal is very interesting and inspirational. Could you explain the rationale behind including DESH communities as a target group over alternative measurements? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt you could have chosen a whole lot of different measures to look at, but I suppose from my point of view, there's 4,000 schools between primary and post-primary. There's 800 DESH nominated schools. So you're getting almost 1/4 of the whole population looked at from that point of view. And again, if you can support the DESH communities, then, and we know they're already nominated as DESH because there is already a disadvantage highlighted there, then we can change things very rapidly. And as Mary talked about the importance of how education can bring people out of poverty and change their future, if we can change the DESH communities, then we can really make a difference on a huge level across society. And because they're in almost every community in the country as well. So I think that's my rationale behind that.
Yeah, it is wide a remit as possible. Julie Dowd, as a primary school teacher, I feel strongly that the closure of schools highlighted the amount schools do to support pupils with additional needs. The lack of exterior supports to students, example autism, to name just one, is a crisis in my opinion. Children in our special classes go years without seeing a professional to support their needs outside the school staff. Schools constantly advocate for the needs of these pupils, but are not supported enough to provide speech and language therapy, OT, psychology services. I admire daily the problem-solving approach to our staff. Parents who are disadvantaged in advocating for the children are further disadvantaged and rely heavily on the support of schools. Navigating those systems is challenging for me as a principal and made so difficult for parents. I think this is a huge issue that requires challenging. I think that's something that we can all agree.
And I suppose having navigated the system, and I think I would be very articulate and know how to get around it. It's extremely difficult to navigate the system. I think more focus on understanding the huge spectrum that autism is, it's, you know, and in my opinion, it's normality to be in that in the spectrum of all the personalities that we see and meet. And it really should be front and center of a lot of the issues that come up. We learn a lot from those that are different, and they learn a lot from us because we fortunately have the ability to integrate as many as those with special needs within the school system. And I think that really is key. I've seen it in action, how it really helps bring people up to the level that they need to be at to function in society, in our society.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that might be one of the positives come out of this is we have to really look at the totality of education and what it gives us, you know, the supports. And I think the principals are just phenomenal in the way they bend over backwards to find ways to make things work. But again, we don't provide them with the support they need. You know, again, can we now borrow to ensure we have enough SLTs, OTs, psychologists? Can we make sure that in 10 years' time this isn't a problem anymore? You know, we've got the UNCRPD to come forward. We need to be providing these systems to those children as young as possible, so that when they reach adulthood, they're as close to self-sufficient or as independent as they can be. And we've given them that maximum choice. And that would be something that really would come out of it. But education, the schools and the way they deal with it and support the parents is phenomenal. Yeah. And I think we can all see that. And even down as far as early years now, we can see that, how important that is as well. Our system has just about highlighted its best parts as well as its tough parts.
And the return on investment in investing in services like this is just phenomenal. I mean, it's exactly what's needed. Hi there, thank you. Can we make sure it is possible in the future July provision is obligatory for schools as opposed to in the kids' homes? I don't quite get that.
I think this year it was provided not in the schools because of the pandemic.
Right, okay.
But given the low numbers and the huge space in schools, I wouldn't see a reason for it. And I would hope by July, a lot of, I mean, most people, and including teachers, who I feel strongly should be getting vaccinated, as happens in the States, that, you know, that protects it. It's all about opening sustainably and safely opening schools. And I for one, would acknowledge the huge work the principals, staff of schools have done alongside my colleagues in public health, Kevin Kelleher and Abigail Collins and all their teams. I think it's been phenomenal. because it was absolutely necessary to happen, as we've heard.
I suppose I agree with that completely. I mean, the only thing, it's been a bugbear of mine. I mean, we should have our schools open for facilities. Their facilities are sitting there quietly for 3 months of the year if it's secondary school, 2 months if it's primary school. They should be open, especially for groups like that. And July provision should be provided in the best school in the area. You know, so if you have a primary school child, but you've got a fantastic brand new secondary school, let's open that and facilitate them there, give them fun and joy. You know, I heard a great term there, and the Children's Commission in England talked about children needing to find the joy in finding out again. And that's what July provision should be about, is really exciting, enjoyable things. Can we tie up the GAA summer camps or the soccer summer camps, the rugby summer camps with a little bit of education? Can we tie the two together? Can we be innovative? And we have the facilities sitting there, 4,000 schools, you know, sitting there doing nothing, and when they should be part of the community 7 days a week. You know, so I think there's certainly moving them out of children's homes can be a positive for a lot of people.
Yeah. Parents are expressing issues with schools reducing times and units without consent of parents. How do parents get school to engage with them when school is not agreeing to meet with parent, especially when parent asks for therapists or support adult to be with them for support with talk? I think we've that's something that we've discussed, that we need more professional support within our school system. Schools do as much as they can, but they are limited by the amount of professional services available to them. Would that be fair to say?
Was that something about reduced timetables, Tom, as well?
Reducing time in units without consent, the consent of parents.
Yeah, so it sounds like a reduced timetable situation. Again, that's something that has been a problem for years, and the government were meant to bring forward a set of guidelines in September of last year. They delayed it because of the COVID, and that needs to come forward hopefully by September this year. But certainly, the parents should be allowed to have a conversation with the principal. They shouldn't be sidestepped or ignored.
Okay. How can we make sure school closures don't happen so fast in Ireland in the future? Compared to other European countries who managed, despite high cases, to not do a full closure of all schools.
Well, I suppose I can say they need to look at the evidence that there have, you know, whether there were outbreaks in schools or not, and there was very, very limited, you know, infection within schools. So I think they need to look at the data and inform their policy on any future closures on that. I think we're getting into a safer place anyway. I do think that there will be masks, you know, in our society for a while. I suppose the upside of wearing the masks is we essentially saw no influenza, pretty much no childhood viral infections, from ear infections to sinusitis to sore throat. It just wasn't happening. The children's, if you ask GPs, they just weren't seeing them. So there are huge benefits to the masking, which can be difficult for younger kids, but in general, older kids have been tolerating hand hygiene and cough etiquette. It's essentially gotten rid of a lot of the things, and the amount of antibiotic prescription is down by over a half. So it's amazing what, you know, the unforeseen benefits, if you like to call it, so that children aren't away from school with these simple measures.
So the infection control measures we've taken have worked.
Absolutely.
That there's proof. Is there a need to think beyond the DESH communities to children experiencing poverty and disadvantage wherever they are? A progressive universalist approach. Again, probably.
I suppose, again, I mean, I would have no difficulty with that, but I mean, my focus is sort of trying to find a measurable system that we can improve on. But certainly, if what I've also said is those people you know that are in poverty, if you can create a universal or a living wage in that circumstance and take them out of that poverty, then that's the way forward. Because we do know who they are. We've identified them. We're already providing other sorts of support. But if they knew they didn't have to scrape and scrimp for every penny in order to feed their child, or give up on their health, their own GP attendance in order to pay for the child's attendance, all these bits and pieces, the things that they do to sacrifice, then that would change everybody. So again, from my point of view, it's working with the families we already know and the societies we already know, which I'm sure will be wider than just DESH.
Yeah. In relation to COVID-19 vaccination rollout, this is from Becky Long. Young adults over the age of 16 with cystic fibrosis have now been added to the new group 4 in the schedule. As children under 16 are at a very high risk of severe disease and compromised lung function from contracting COVID-19, should their parents, guardians, caregivers be prioritised for the vaccination? And of course, this applies to all vulnerable children and the adults in their lives. Professor Horgan, maybe.
Yeah, I know it's a huge consideration has been given to that in NIAC. It's about carers essentially of all ages, whether you're caring for an elderly parent or caring for a child with who's at risk. The only reason we aren't at a place is really because of the stock or the inventory isn't coming in as quickly as that we can get it out. I know that that is under consideration to protect those, but again, thankfully, most children, even with underlying diseases like cystic fibrosis or chronic neurological diseases, are still less at risk of developing severe COVID. And literally the way they've done it from the 85-year-olds downwards, and having just finished being very busy for the last 2 months, really they're the people most at risk. Older people, people with frail elderly, those with diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure. It was exceptional to have somebody outside a risk category come in and be sick in the hospital. And just to emphasize again to the listeners that the vaccinations are that good. They're even better in real life. It's switched off infection healthcare workers, which is really important because we care for people who are vulnerable. They are really good, and I would encourage any and all of you who are offered a vaccine, take the first one that you're offered. They're that good.
Thank you for that. And Niall's reference, this is Teresa Heaney from Early Childhood Ireland. Niall's reference to low-level melancholy should be a concern to us all, for us all. When the ECEC program returned yesterday, we heard all day about playful, joyful children delighted to spending their time, meeting their friends again and finding the joy. How do we elevate an understanding about the importance of play for children? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's we've worked with the Playful City here in Dublin and trying to improve sort of the concept of play, making it accessible for people. You know, we need to create playgrounds that are wheelchair accessible, playgrounds that are accessible for other children with disabilities. We need children to design them. I spoke to a Dublin City designer, architect, who brought a number of children up to one of the woods. I think it's somewhere in Stepaside, something like that. And they changed the way they designed the playground because the children saw that you could swing from one tree across a river to another. Again, it's that it's a risk adverse thing. The children want to do things, but the councils are afraid to do it in case it's dangerous. Starting to bring those things in together, and then the learning that comes with it. So again, if we can find an innovative way to do our summer camps now, where you get education and fun, play starts to show itself as an educational tool. I mean, how many times have we been told sport teaches you so many things, art teaches you the same thing, music teaches you, working with groups, whatever. Play in its many formats is easily the most educational thing you can do for a child, and I think we just need to remind our adults of that every so often. That, you know, most of the stuff I can trace back most of my learning to games, to sports, to coaches, to teammates. That's where you learn how to be a good human being. And I think we need to just remind ourselves every so often, and the government needs to be reminded of that too. They might do them no harm every so often. Yeah. Take a trip to a playground, remind themselves to be like a child.
Play is often dismissed as a nice to have, but it's central to development of particularly young children. Professor Horgan, have you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, if we don't allow children to be a bit more adventurous in what they do, it's part of their coping skills when they get further on in life. And, you know, not cocooning them enough, but not too much. It's always hard balance. Remember my mother telling me, child rearing, the hardest job of all. It's always trying to get that balance, but you know, they need to be grow up as independent people, independent thinkers, so that they are really able to look after themselves in life. And part of that is playing while in a safe environment. It's not a perfect environment.
Okay, this is a thorny one. Would either Dr. Muldoon or Professor Horgan be concerned about children spending so much more time online? Clearly, there are many. It's ironic that we are all online while interacting, considering this question. Clearly, there are many opportunities online for children in terms of learning, socializing, etc. But there are also risks, and the evidence suggests that some of those risks have been heightened during this time. And that's Alex Cooney from Cyber Safe Kids. Niall?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think I've read the evidence where Europol and people like that are concerned about an increase in activity of nefarious individuals and child abuse images and things like that. Again, I suppose my concept of internet safety is and I've used this many times, is the concept of teaching a child how to cross the road. You bring them in their buggy and they see you pressing the button to wait for the green man to cross the road. They eventually get out of the buggy, they press the button themselves, they learn to wait for the green man. Then they're on their own, they run up to it and you watch them cross the road. And then eventually they cross the road without you. The danger is no different. The danger is always there. The danger is exactly the same, but you've taught them how to use it and how to find a safe place. We need to do the same with the internet. We can't sort of switch on our safety radar all the time. So we need to just provide our children with that safety. And again, we now have children literally from 2 years of age using apps, you know, and that's very good. That's educational. That's the way it should be. So we're going to be in this situation from now on. But we need, I think probably as parents, we need to really up our game as understanding where the risks might come from and just providing better support from that point of view. But I think this has probably been a lifesaver to have the social media options. But again, you need to keep talking to your children and say, listen, if you have a problem, if you're concerned, if you're scared, come to me. You know, if somebody says something, does something, shows something, let me know. And if you tell them that from 4 years of age onwards, they won't know what you're talking about for 10 years, but all of a sudden it'll make sense to them. You know, you could get hurt on this. It could be a dangerous thing. Let me know if it happens, or let some adult that you trust know. So I think it's trying to reinforce that consistent message throughout. And this is obviously the most obvious time of it.
Is there anything we can do to protect special schools and classes from future closures? Professor Horgan, maybe. I think you've alluded to solutions already, I think.
Yeah, I mean, a number of the solutions, obviously, our public health people have been really supportive. I think they should be prioritized. I think bringing schools back for a day just before midterm, special schools, and then, you know, having the week break and then back again. Probably, I'm not too sure how helpful that was, other than it was a particular date. You know, and again, I think in the next few months, teachers will be vaccinated. There will be that extra safe layer of safety. And I saw a question that somebody else had on testing in schools. As you know, in the UK, they returned to school yesterday and they've rolled out antigen testing in rapid testing, kind of like a pregnancy test in their schools. And essentially what these tests do are identify cases of infectiousness, not just infection, but people who are infectious or contagious. Identify them really quickly and then, you know, remove them from the school, so the whole school doesn't have to come down, close down. And what they're doing over in the UK is teaching, or it's actually England, teaching the students how to do it so they can do it at home before they go to school. So all of these things are layered mitigation. They're, you know, in addition to the masking, the social distancing, the hand hygiene, the PCR testing, the vaccination, rapid testing. It's like Swiss cheese. You just keep on building the layers until all the holes are gone.
Okay. Thank you both very much for your participation, and indeed thank you all for your participation. I'm going to call an end to the event, if you don't mind. I have a few thank yous to say, and I apologize for the many questions that are left unanswered. the level of interest demonstrates just how important this issue is. First of all, I think if just reflecting on this morning, if we were to have an event like this, I don't think we could have picked two more insightful speakers than Professor Horgan and Dr. Muldoon. I think the contents of the two speeches or the two talks just dovetailed just perfectly. So thank you very much for your time and your interest this morning. Thanks to all the members of the Children's Futures campaign for organising and helping organising today's event and indeed other events that we've had. The Community Foundation of Ireland deserves a particular thanks for supporting this campaign work. And finally, if you are interested in becoming involved in the Children's Futures campaign, you can contact the Children's Rights Alliance, and you can do that through the website. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much, the two speakers, and we'll call a close to the event now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.